Ladies and gentlemen, Nvidia's RTX 50 series of graphics cards potentially will not launch until 2025, according to a leaked roadmap. This brings up a ton of very interesting questions, not least of which how AMD will respond, and also what this will mean for Intel as well, given Battlemage will launch in around Q2 of next year. We're going to be discussing all of this and much more, including a successor for the Switch, after this message from the video sponsor.
If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices.
So let's start things out, shall we, with the actual roadmap itself, and it's quite interesting. So far, the actual roadmap is not actually listing the name of the architecture which we will see. Instead, it's essentially saying Lovelace Next. There are a couple of different products which are listed. Grace Hopper, of course, we can see. Then we have Hopper next, we have Ada Lovelace next, Grace next, and then a number of other products for the DPU. Now again, there is no actual architectural name, so for example, it doesn't say something along the lines of Blackwell. But very interestingly, it does seem that RTX 50, which of course will be for gaming, will not launch until 2025. Now, of course, the time window here is a little ambiguous, so technically speaking, it could be very late in 2024, but realistically, it doesn't look like until 2025 to me, and there is no specific window there, so technically it could launch in, let's say, December of 2025. So I've reached out to a couple of sources because all of the information that I'd personally been hearing before that, as well as Nvidia's general canvas when it comes to releasing products, seemed to indicate that it was going to be sometime around August or September that we would see a product announcement and potential release. And honestly, I basically was told that it's possibly something to do with the free NM capacity, or rather lack thereof, over at Apple. There are some other things as well, not least of which that at the moment Nvidia are making money hand over fist when it comes to HPC and AI products. So it's very possible that they want to focus on that next year and just basically rake in a ton of money. Honestly, when it comes to this stuff, it's very difficult to know what is and what isn't true, but I will say that if 2025 is correct, and there's no reason to doubt that this roadmap is wrong, that's going to lead to a lot of interesting questions. Let's start things out with AMD. What happens with RDNA 4? Because all signs basically pointed to RDNA 4 launching next year as well. Does that mean that AMD potentially could have some lead? For example, and this is just hypothetical, if AMD releases RDNA 4, let's say in September, October time, does that mean that they've got 2, 3, 4 months sales advantage over Nvidia, potentially more? Well, who knows? Maybe AMD themselves have also delayed, or possibly they were always intending to release RDNA 4 in, well, 2025. Again, AMD are also pushing, of course, towards HPC as well. I'm trying to do some more digging on the AMD side. I've had one source tell me that RDNA 4 may get a delay until 2025, but honestly, I wouldn't put too much faith in that at the moment because this stuff is still quite early, and, well, sometimes it takes a while for information to start filtering out. As people finally start to notice that information is becoming more public and tongues start to loosen a little bit. I'm going to be very interested, though, to see what the actual release schedule also means for Intel. So when Intel first released products like the A750 and A770, it was received, well, let's just say not too great, for a number of reasons, not least of which, and mostly because of the driver situation, but drivers have come a long way since then. And at this point, it's actually very arguable that in the lower product tiers, for example, the RTX 3060 and now the 4060 is just released, Intel are actually a really compelling solution, especially given the price of these cards have actually come down a lot. Now, ultimately, I would imagine this means that Intel at this stage are using the first generation of cards essentially as, I don't want to say a canary in a coal mine, but they're really just using them to try and get their name out there, to make a name for themselves. And also, of course, while it's easy to have internal developers and testers, well, do that stuff, the ultimate way to improve your products, of course, is to release them and get a lot more people to give feedback. At this stage, the drivers have come a long way, and I have to say that things like XeSS are actually pretty impressive, so I think that there is a good argument to be made that Battlemage will be pretty interesting. Now, Battlemage, at least from what I've seen and from the roadmaps that I've actually leaked as well, it does seem that Battlemage is going to be releasing late Q1, probably more like Q2 of next year. Now, of course, Battlemage is not going to be as performant as, let's say, the RTX 50 series of cards. At the moment, it seems from lots of leaks that have appeared online, including from myself, it's going to be roughly on par with the RTX 4080-ish, give or take. Even, let's be very generous and say that it's 10% faster than the 4080. And let's say that it sells for a really good price. This would actually mean that Intel have a pretty good chance at carving a name for itself in the GPU market. If, hypothetically, let's say that we see a March release date, and that is not a leak, that's just an example, for RTX 50, that would give Intel 9-10 months, maybe a little longer, depending on the release schedule of Battlemage, to be actually really competitive. And that's really good news for them, especially if Celestial launches and is actually quite performant as well. From everything I'm hearing at the moment, this is going to be Intel's strategy, basically to release products in roughly the mid-range performance segment, but to be quite, conscientious of the pricing. I had one source tell me, and they're quite close to Intel, that they were kind of thinking of this card as, well, they want gamers to think of the card as like the new GTX 1060. Now, whether or not they're going to actually manage to achieve that, and at the price that gamers would want to pay, who the hell knows. The RTX 4060 has just launched, for example, and it's receiving, well, let's just say lackluster, I can't speak today, lackluster reviews, mostly of course because of the pricing situation. Let me know down in the comments actually what your thoughts are of Intel, especially when it comes to their GPUs. I think it's fair to say that, you know, we've got AMD and that's great, but a third competitor is always wanted. Going back to RTX 50 at the moment, there is no evidence 100% that Blackwell is also for gaming. However, I've had multiple sources now tell me that it actually is. However, there are divergences in architecture. It's going to be very interesting though to see what Nvidia's strategy is going forward, especially because HPC is just so crazy. I've heard that Blackwell is going to be roughly 2 times faster than RTX 40 or RTX 50 targets are going to be 2 times RTX 40. But as always with this stuff, it's very hard to know exactly what's true, especially because we're so far out at the moment for launch. And it's also very possible that if Nvidia doesn't feel like it has to release a really high-end product because, for example, RDNA 4 from its internal, investigations or spying or whatever isn't going to hit those targets, or whatever reason, it may choose to not do that, or it might choose to go with a smaller die. It's going to be very interesting, though, to see what the next generation is actually like. Speaking of next generation, let's just briefly talk about this Switch, shall we? So, the Switch is in a very interesting position. It's been selling like hotcakes. I think just about everyone knows someone who has a Switch. Even people who are not hardcore gamers seem to be really interested in something like Zelda. And, of course, games like, well, let's just face it, Mario Kart are just synonymous with party games, and just everyone seems to at least like that game. However, it also has been a console which has been very difficult to port modern titles from, even from like the PS4 or whatever. It's been really kind of a struggle. In games like Doom, for example, it was a monumental porting effort. So everyone has been waiting, of course, for the new Switch and whatever it ends up being called, and see what it's actually capable of. Multiple times now, Nintendo have essentially said that there's no plans to release a new console anytime soon, and of course that's going to be the party line, because they still want the Switch to be, well, selling. However, for the first time now, we actually have a bit of evidence from Nintendo that they have acknowledged that there is new hardware on the way. Recently, there was an investor call with, of course, Nintendo being asked various questions, and Furukawa was asked questions by the shareholder, and though he didn't exactly announce a next-generation console, as this is going to happen at like a Nintendo Direct or something. Let's just be honest. They did make some promises. Essentially said that this new console, whatever it's going to be called, let's just call it the Switch 2 for the sake of this video, is going to use the exact same Nintendo account system, whether that's a positive or a negative, I'll let you guys decide, to ensure it's basically an easy transition for customers. So in other words, if you have your current account system and it's working with the Switch, it's not going to be that difficult to port to a new console. By the way, guys, if you can hear background noise, I apologize. At the moment, I have to have all the windows open in the flat because it is really hot and humid at the moment in the UK. So if you can hear background noise, we'll try to remove it, post-editing. But again, people going by the flat and stuff like that. So I apologize, we'll do our best. But yeah, I linked about the Switch Pro back in the day, and of course that was, as many of you know, confirmed by Nvidia's hack, that there was a Switch console that basically did seem to support DLSS. Now, as far as I'm aware, that specific model is no longer in a thing. It's basically been discontinued, and they've basically, I wouldn't say started from scratch, but this new system seems to be a pretty big new design. I've heard that the performance is actually pretty interesting. It's around Xbox Series S in terms of GPU performance, but that does seem to be accounting for DLSS, which of course is going to be part of what the Switch is capable of. Unsurprisingly, given the fact that, again, it's going to be using Nvidia for the hardware. So it would make sense that any Switch development kit is just going to have basically DLSS as a toggle. I'm somewhat simplifying things, of course, but that's basically what's going to happen. I'm going to be very interested to see what Nintendo come up with. I'm guessing it's going to be a variant of Nvidia's mobile chipsets. I've heard it's something like Orin, and I'm going to assume, although of course I very much could be wrong here, that it's still going to be a portable system. Because honestly, it's just a money printing machine. I would be very surprised if Nintendo goes back when this system has been so successful just because of the portable nature of it. And they don't really have a direct competitor in this space. I mean, mobile phones, for example, PlayStation Project Q has not exactly been the system that many of us had hoped for from Sony. And it doesn't seem that Xbox is releasing a portable system anytime soon, which is a shame. I do feel that an Xbox Series S with some changes and some tweaks could be a really interesting system for portable, especially on a smaller processor and some other tweaks and, changes, but again, it doesn't seem like Microsoft are doing that, so it's going to be very interesting to see what Nintendo comes up with. I think if the console is significantly more powerful and is able to run things like UE5 games, it will mean that titles should be more easily ported. Of course, it's going to depend on other stuff as well, not least of which the storage on the system, the amount of RAM, and other bits and bobs. So it's going to be extremely curious to me what Nintendo come up with, and also whether there's backwards compatibility. Now my guess is, and again, I don't know this, my guess is there probably will be backwards compatibility with the Switch, and I would really hope there is, but with Nintendo it's really difficult to know. They just kind of do their own thing. With that said, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you did, well, it's YouTube, you know what to do. Leave a like on the video and all that stuff, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.